Good evening, Canada. We welcome our viewers in our regular weekly talk show, Voice of Canada. My today's co-host is Cindy Young. And today we have a very dynamic speaker, guest, David Culham, who needs no introduction. He has done so much work for Canada and for the rest of the world that if we are going to cover his bio, it will take nearly 4 or 5 interviews. So we are going to cover his major points today only for in this interview, because since a long time his interview was due in our show Voice of Canada, produced by Awaz TV Entertainment, and we welcome our honored guest David Culham.
Oh, nice to be here.
Welcome to our show.
Yeah.
Just briefly introduce yourself, very briefly.
Well, I was a teacher and a department head, and a lot of people asked me to negotiate some land use things, and I did. And then a lot of them pushed me to run. And at that time, it wasn't a full-time job. The town was in. So 1973, I ran in the election, and at 31, I just turned 31, and I beat an incumbent. I went on to beat another incumbent when I had left. So in 74, I was on the first council with Hazel and many others.
We will go in the details when we come with the questions. You say, I'm David Culham from Mississauga, a proud Canadian. That's the
Well, I am a proud Canadian.
Yeah, you know, and that's what I want to hear from my ears.
Okay.
Go ahead, Cindy.
Welcome, David. It's wonderful to have you here today.
Nice to meet you.
And I'm Cindy Young, and I'm your co-host for the Voice of Canada, which we host every week with prominent personalities, such as yourself, from all walks of life and who have the public service. So welcome our week's honored guest, David Culham, to our show, Voice of Canada. So David, if you could inform us and our viewers your role as department head in our Mississauga secondary schools, and what role you played and what you were teaching.
Well, I was teaching geography and science at Councillor Park.
Wow.
It was there. It opened up under a new system, and I was there basically for a year, and then politics took me away, and I was taken into the board helping in planning. And then because I was involved in planning, I just became too involved, too much time, and I took a leave of absence. So I had a leave of absence until 1978, which I went back for 4 years teaching. And then but I spent the rest of the time at City Hall.
David, inform our viewers that you were there in the Mississauga City Council for 23 long years.
Yeah.
And in between, I saw there was a gap also.
Yes.
So you elected.
Well, I was in 9 elections, and I won 8 of them.
Explain.
And I ran at 33.
And everything.
At 33, I ran for mayor, and in a 4-way race, and I lost.
That time Mayor Hazel was there?
No, Hazel wasn't. She didn't come until 78.
Wow.
So Ron Searle won the election over the incumbent Dr. Dobkin. And so I went back into teaching, and rather than pick something else to do,
that was your
I was very comfortable.
noble profession. Yeah.
And but it was quite exciting. Not only were we in a new city and a new incident, but we got into an inquiry, which was quite distracting for me, stressful. And I was, as a counselor, we weren't really involved. Hazel was involved with Dr. Dobkin, but the rest of us weren't. And but it distracted us. And I came in with an agenda, wanting to get it done. Like in May of 74, I got the Valley policies in place very quickly.
We are going to cover that Valley dedication policy.
So it was very distracting. But in 76, because I was disappointed, now I can't really, it's so many years away why, but I ran, arrogance of youth, I guess. But I lost. I only won 1 of 9 wards, and it was my own. And Ward 6, which was the largest ward, but not enough to carry. And from that, we were very excitingly involved. I remember when we had a stagecoach, and we all went down, the council was all on the stagecoach going down here in Ontario. It was quite exciting.
Different.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
Because when I also came 25 years ago, the demographics were different. and now it's entirely something different.
Different. It is different. Different than almost any place else in Canada. We're very multicultural, and my life has been touched by almost every ethnic
religion,
group.
every ethnic group.
And so you get an entree, and of course, what you do when you're interacting with people, start reading their history,
Absolutely.
and become a familiar. And then you develop friends like Awaz, like Louis Villano in the Greek community, or eventually Victor O. You meet a lot of different people, and you see quite a scale of really great people that are participating and helping out.
That's absolutely
Each
amazing.
other.
But David, we also read in your bio that you played an important role in City's Planning Committee. And as the first chairperson of such an important committee, if you could kindly inform our viewers of your role in detail for this important assignment that you took to implement.
Well, I was the first chair of planning, and I had done some negotiating with builders and developers before that for a year or so.
Wow.
And I had been appointed by the town council onto a transportation study. And so I really got for a year in depth on transportation. And I felt there was a big lack in that they weren't dealing with land use. They're just dealing with transportation. So one of the first things I did as chair was to construct a new committee. And the commissioner planning was now involved with the engineers and the consultants. And I chaired that subcommittee for the year, and we got going on the official plan, and because we had about 400 amendments to the town plan, it really wasn't a stage to move the city forward. So we needed a lot of new policies, environmental policies, which I was significantly involved with, but a lot of the transportation policies and so on had to go. So I learned a lot from those people. And we got funding from the federal government, the Liberal government of the day. Barney Danson was the minister, and he helped me. And the Davis government, the Conservative government in Ontario, helped us with 125. I think at first they feared that new people coming in were going to stop everything and start the plan and talk a lot but do nothing. We wanted to work along with builders and developers, but to set the stage. And so that's what we did, and I think it wasn't finished in the first term, and Ron Searle took a lot of credit later for completing it, but the policies were established. Like May 1974, we developed the policies on not only the Credit River Valley, but all of the valleys, the top of Bank. And by dedicating it, of course, we didn't have to buy it. Developers frequently thought that even road allowances, which they set aside, the city would eventually have to buy them. Well, we negotiated that they were going to dedicate those as well. And so we were deeply involved in setting fees, levies on development and various things. So there's a lot of technical work that had to go into it. But eventually, we developed a format that worked for the city for a lot of years, decades.
Incredible process.
Awesome work you have done, David. David, inform our viewers that in 1974, you took an important task of developing the valley dedication policy, which acquires all the lands below the top of the bank acquisition of woodlands of Mississauga Credit River.
Well, I was helped to some extent. There was a Dr. Harris, who was a geologist at Arundel College, and he wrote a report on solifluxing, which is shifting of soil because of saturation of water. And we had a number of cases in Don Valley and our valley of slumping and the valley disappearing and into the valley. So we wanted to set it back that we would not have that. And we haven't had any of that since that policy of May of 74. And basically, I went to the developers because I didn't want it to be a political catastrophe or chaos. And most of them agreed with a young guy who was 31 years of age, and they recognized that I was learning a lot of what they were doing. And when I negotiated things, I wasn't ridiculous. We went to where it had to be, not slow negotiations. And so they agreed. And the first land taken was in Arundel. And that's now part of Arundel Park.
Wow.
So it's so we were able to do that. The first time I ever met Marco Musso in 1983,
Wow.
years later, I told him of Valley lands that he had, and I wanted him to donate it. He didn't know of the land. He said, well, I'll check into it. And he did donate it. And there's a rock with the carvings on it for thanking him for helping out in that way. Hewick Meadows off Eglinton. I negotiated that one night till 3 a.m. And you have to deal with, his son had learned to kayak and was a national champion in the river on their land.
What a memory.
And so what happened was, I said, we'll name it Hewick Meadows. And he loved that idea and in commemoration of their involvement there. And of course, that's how the name came. That became a place for the Girl Guides to plant trees. And I planted trees with them for years on just that plot. Scouts took others and other communities had it. So it was something that happened, but it happened right across the city. We took the dedication. And so it helped in the Etobicoke Creek and so on. Whereas south of Dundas, there was no area either there or over the Etobicoke Creek or the other creeks. So we had to think of the streams and how they were coming in and what we would do about it. So we started changing water, stormwater studies, and we stopped paving over, the big concrete viaducts, and we naturalized most of our streams from that on.
Lovely.
So you see the difference at, let's say, Clarkson Go Station. You see all that concrete in the water thing. Well, that didn't happen after 74.
Wow.
So it was opportune. I think part of the reason I get doing this is if the council thought it was a good idea, we didn't have to go through all kinds of codes of conduct and all kinds of other things.
No red tape.
We just
The red tape was much less.
And of course, even federal and provincial leaders acted quickly. I remember dealing with Judy LaMarche.
I hope that was the same time.
Yeah. And now we're very bureaucratic. Everything is being more cumbersome. And of course, the more players and everything, some who aren't even involved, it slows the process down and often derails it because it becomes too expensive.
Too expensive as time passes. David, my same question is in part A and B. My second part of this question is that during 1985, the city recognized your work, hard work and everything, and they named the trail in your name, David Culham Trail. So give us the whole information, how it happened, and you're feeling so proud, and we have walked so many times on that trail.
Yes, I've enjoyed your company, and we met a lot of people there. The valley, I've walked it with my own children, and I recognized that we needed an entree into the valley. I wanted to naturalize the valley. Much of it was agricultural. That was a dump, a garbage dump at Arundel. And that's where the city's rock for City Hall went. And so we wanted that. And we had to have a point of access, both for animals and for people. And so that's the idea of the trail.
But it's a big honor. It's in your name, the trail, David Culham Trail. And whenever we used to walk with him, again, we are going to start. He first takes us to the trail only.
I'm going to have to go for a walk now.
Yeah.
You know the whole history.
We have a former group every summer.
Absolutely.
So every Sunday, 1 hour walk.
I would love to now. I know the whole history. It's amazing.
Brad Butt, the councillor, is going to have a walk on the 15th or the 29th of April.
Okay.
And I think he'll invite a lot of people. And maybe even several other councillors, because two of the councillors are also involved in the valley, and maybe that would be an entree for them.
Awesome.
But it was, I guess, over 20 years, I planted some 4,500 potted trees a year with volunteers. I always tried to do 10% of the plant, and we usually have 300 to 400 trees to plant. And we'd always take the pictures after the planting, so that it wasn't a photo op, it was a planting that happened to have a photograph. And that was certainly, I have a lot of pictures with children planting. And even later when Ron Starr was having one, I was planting with a couple of kids. And of all ethnic backgrounds would come out and participate. And I had planted trees a lot when I was a teacher with,
Beautiful.
And I think I just carried that over
for the environment,
Well, and if you go along, of course, all the streets, we took, the 1 or 2 trees, like Thomas Street, we planted that with scouts. Then the city became a policy of the region and the city to plant the trees, naturalize the slopes so they didn't have to cut grass.
Right.
1983 was the first time I got the city on board for that policy, and it was along the Dundas. And the staff did a study, and they figured that if we fertilized and watered for a month, that we could just remove a huge amount of grass cutting, which was also dangerous on a slope. And of course, you go east of Mavis Road, all of those trees were planted with me by volunteers. And so it was a lot of fun, really, but it also was very taxing, especially on my family. Yeah.
For sure.
For the viewers, we'll take a short break and we'll be back with you in a little while. We have got a very distinguished guest, David Culham, as our this week's speaker, with my co-host Cindy Young. So we would continue our interview with David Culham. Go ahead.
David, with your vast portfolio, we also noticed and read that you introduced the curbside blue box recycling program that we all know so well. And in 1986, the city also awarded you the Ontario Individual Award for the program that you had launched earlier. If you could give us full details of these.
Well, I think I'd been appointed to the task force by the province on recycling.
Awesome.
And I was able to read that there was a pilot project in Galt, just a pilot, paid for by the province. But in 1981, we had initiated a curbside paper recycling. And I was very frustrated as chairman of Public Works of not getting a lot of tonnage. So I started going into the parades, and I would take kids along, we'd do leaflets. And I think in 83, we did something like 83 tons of paper. I wasn't happy. So we pushed that every month, and we were getting up over 100 tons then a month. And for 1984, we did 1,200 tons.
Wow.
To give you an idea, and then the next year, we did over 2,000. But in the first month of Blue Box, we were able to do 2,000 tons. So we just skyrocketed the tonnage of recycling. With the Blue Box, we added the glass and the metals. And then later I added the plastics after I'd seen some plastic plants in North America, Massachusetts. And it came from the curbside, frustration with it. And then I set up the consultants or the contractors that we really wanted curbside. So Laidlaw lowballed curbside. They went the lowest tender, but when you put this twice weekly summer garbage, they were the low tender. So I wrote the motion, the staff sat in their hands, and that went through the council. 8-1 it was. Someone was away. I think Mayor McCallion was away. So it went quite well. The Blue Box, it was selected as blue by the consultants in Galt, and because it would handle the sunlight rather well. And so I thought, I just called it Blue Box because I wanted to sell the idea. I'd been selling it all along, but curbside. And that doesn't leave an image, but if you say Blue Box, everybody knows where that box is in the tape.
Definitely.
So the contract, the government changed in the same time that happened to a Liberal government, and someone wanted red. And I said, no, it's either blue or orange, because our other color is orange of the city.
Definitely orange also.
Yeah.
Because there are 3 doors.
So that's how it got. And we actually put the name on it from Mississauga. And we were sued by Blue Box Systems in the States, but they eventually backed down. Awesome. But it worked out quite well. It was something I just wanted to do and wanted to get started. And I guess we were the first city on a citywide basis to start
in North America.
Well, yes, I think it was North America, but certainly in Canada. But I think it was because eventually I went down to Massachusetts and other places who were interested in the same things, and they got started there too. But it was interesting. So it was the Recycling Council of Ontario that gave me the recycling award in '86, and it just took off from that time. Each time you were dealing with a big idea that was new to the governments, the provincial government wanted to be aboard, and that usually was a good sign, but it also took more time. Because we started Blue Box without any provincial subsidy. Eventually, it became in the next year a subsidy, and they were trying to push it across. I think the mayor McCallion went to Ottawa to indicate I was teaching one period a day and I couldn't go. But it was something quite interesting, and the province really got on board. They had politicians that were looking at what was happening, and they liked new ideas. And so it was very helpful eventually, but it slowed us down. As with the computerized traffic signals, it took us 5
That's
years.
my next question to you.
Well, it took us a long time. Yes, but that was very gratifying.
Incredible. And look where it is now.
Yes.
David, in 1981, you really worked hard and you introduced the computerized traffic system in Mississauga. So would you like to throw some light on how it happened? And today we have got such a disciplined traffic due to your efforts.
Well, I was in graduate school. I had studied periodically graph theory, and you look in terms of networks, and of course you have to get traffic through intersections. And I remember going on University Avenue where there was a 2-lane left turning movement. So we introduced that the first time at Queensway and Mavis Road, and then Mavis and Eglinton was a 2-lane. So that's pretty typical in Mississauga today. But in those days, there was if you had left-hand turns, they were usually 1. And there weren't that many. Toronto had very narrow streets. So they had this difficulty. And that's why they went to computerized traffic signals to get them through those intersections. So we were the first outside of Toronto in Canada.
The GTA.
But all of Canada.
All of Canada.
Toronto was the first in Canada. And we were the second. But it took us a long time because there weren't the experts. One of our experts was at MIT, and he had cancer.
Awesome.
He took a lot of time, and but the first time I asked you asked for a study, and the study came back. I had thought we could improve our capital program by 15%. And they said 32% they would make it. So that was a big thing where instead of building 6-lane roads, we built 4 lanes and the intersections to move. But it all just came from looking at the problem. People were backed up every summer with construction, and we had to plan. And that was an idea that I had that the engineers accepted, and we went on to get it done. Now I know Toronto has 2 computers. But they have such narrow right-of-ways, and we had the larger ones.
Because it's old city and old planning and all that. And Mississauga is a pretty young infant city.
Well, and it was a time to experiment with something new, and it worked quite nicely. We had a lot of support from a lot of different, and there again, the province wanted to get involved so that they would have what they say off the shelf for other municipalities. So all the municipalities then benefited from our exploit of it. Toronto's had a unique situation that wasn't adaptable other ways. So they used the Mississauga model for all of the cities.
Well, it's great when you have new developments coming up because they can take all of those models in, and it makes a big difference.
Very definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
So David, while reading, once again, your very rich bio, we also noticed that you played an important role in the Chinese community, being appointed as the advisor to the Mississauga Chinese Business Association, whose founder is our Senator Victor O. And you also worked hard to establish a Muslim mosque and a church as well for the unity of all communities who are based here in Mississauga. If you could please give a brief account of these.
Well, I think that for the churches and the synagogues and the mosque, I see these as focal points for community activities. These are places where people meet other people, their children, and so on. So they're very important to me. Not the denomination so much as that they exist and that they thrive. So that was very important. And I was deeply involved. Now with the Chinese community, I had a lot of Chinese background people in Arundel. One of my close friends is Andrew Lee, who is a nuclear physicist and engineer that worked. His son went to school with my daughter, and we're still friends, and we have lunch once a month.
Awesome.
But it was an entree. Victor came along, and we set up the plaza on Credit View in Burnethorpe. It was an industrial mall that had been established, didn't have any retail problem. It was his idea. He wanted a modern Chinese plaza. We had the a historic one down on the Dundas with the ceramic
with
walls.
ceramic walls and all
And
that.
so I persuaded the owner of the plaza to go that way, Mariana Ely. I had dealt with him many times. He had actually donated, as well as we bought the woodlot from him, he also donated land. And I got along with him extremely well. Learned a lot from him. He was a very brilliant man. And so he went along with it. And we did it by committee of adjustment. So that it didn't take 5 years to do. And it became very successful. I remember that one night with the children with the Chinese lanterns. Lights, so we waited after dark, and it was so beautiful.
We did a show, Chinese New Year show, and we had put those lanterns in our show just now.
Exactly.
We did that show very well, and this year was a great success that we celebrated the Chinese New Year.
Yeah,
So it was a lot of fun, and Victor and I became very close friends. And
he's a learned man and a very far-sighted. I've seen in Victor.
Most people don't know he was an airline pilot for Qantas. And
Wow, that's a new information.
He's from Singapore. He's found where the family came from 200 or 300 years before in China, and the people in the industry. He's an incredibly concerned
God
person.
willing, we'll soon have him in our show.
Yes, that would be amazing.
And he's just a tremendous guy. So that he asked me, and I don't speak Chinese, but I know how government needs to work and move. And I think the joke was that ever I asked Hazel to come out as mayor, she would come. And they didn't think they could get her there. So that's probably why I was the advisor, because there were several advisors that spoke Chinese that had been involved in trade. But they were very fine. Well, it's Mississauga for so many different ethnic groups. And you have to facilitate government for them. And when you have that, where you work together, strong relationships develop. And Victor's one of many, but certainly he enriched my life with his experience. He and Rosa became
Rosa, really. That's a pillar for Victor.
Yeah.
Rosa has become really stood like a strong pillar.
And she organizes things beautifully. Yeah. So that's how that happened. The mosque happened through Awaz. They had a problem. And he approached me, and I went and had a look and talked to the people. And the
that was which mosque in Mississauga?
The one on
Erin Mills?
West of Erin Mills on the South Service Road.
Service road. That's the biggest one.
That's the biggest one.
Very large
And
huge budget.
they were into problems. I got them lawyers and planners. The city staff didn't go along with it, and the only two councillors, Nando Unica and I, voted for it. But it was passed at the Ontario Municipal Board, and the fact that it wasn't a unanimous decision against it was for it in a sense.
Kept it going.
And but I certainly had a long relationship there, and went to a lot of. And I was there I was off council at the time when they opened, but I was invited to be there, and very positive associations. And I learned a lot about their community
And the religion
groups,
also.
Yes, not only Sunnis and
Shias.
Shia, but the Ismaili and the Ahmadiyas as well.
David, there are 78 sects in Muslims.
Yeah,
There are not only Ahmadiyas and Shias.
Well, you've lived in these countries and you know these things, yes.
78 sects are there.
I only
That
got
is
the
the
four.
major cause of confusion.
Yeah.
Because every sect's thinking is a bit different.
Right.
Well, in a lot of the early establishments by Arabic culture, which is very different and very, and of course, others have broken off because they don't want that association with violence and
Definitely, or
secondary
extremism.
and most are out of that, but that's the only problem. So and unfortunately, everybody gets tabbed with the difficult situations and mainly Muslims have suffered more from Muslim extremism than any other group.
True.
And especially, I remember going to the square when a Pakistani military school had been attacked and children were killed, and the great sorrow that people had, and you share, you feel their pain.
That's for sure.
David, in 2012, Canadians also celebrated the Diamond Jubilee of Our Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. And I do recall, the memory is very fresh, that in the same badge, I also got the award, you also got the award, and Brad Butt, who initiated on behalf of the Governor General, did the honors to us, and we had a lovely ceremony at the Legion.
Yes.
So would you like to throw some light? We belong to the same badge.
Yeah. Well, I've got it on a wall and plaqued. I certainly was proud to be recognized as you are. I think that it says that people need to go out of their way to involve their neighbors and their community in positive things. And you learn a lot when you do
And
that.
those who have worked in service of Canada were awarded.
And I think that's, so I'm very proud of it. And the other awards that came along.
David, we also see from your bio only that you are also the founder and you played a major role in introducing accessible taxis in Mississauga. At the same time, the Blue Ribbon Task Force to improve the air quality.
Yeah.
So would you like to throw on both this year good things you did for Mississauga?
When I first was on city council in '74, I met a person involved as an investor in taxis from Port Credit. And of course, they all had to be amalgamated under one system. I wasn't involved. Dr. Dobkin was mainly involved, but I was watching and listening. But eventually I met a lot of people and there was need for change at the airport and our system. So I became a member of the committee, learned a lot from the members, and eventually chaired it and came up with solutions, one of which was security. And the taxis put that glass protection in. And then the other was with some friends were handicapped and needed access. So we worked out with each of the brokers would have a special taxi given to them. It didn't come out of their quantity because mainly it's people in the industry that are, let's say, taxi drivers. They get on a system. And eventually they get awarded one free of charge. They have to pay for the car and everything. But we don't have investors. We do have investors, but mainly it's people coming up through the system. That have dedicated to the taxis that get the taxis. We're the only, I don't know if we're the only city that does it, but it's a good system. And that's how that happened to come about. And I was in the position of chair to push it and to bring attention to it through the newspapers and so on, as we did with Blue Box. I had a lot of pictures with Blue Box.
Blue Box and
asked
also.
to
Your hand was there,
to
in bringing
AMO
this kind of taxis here in Mississauga.
But it was a need, and people asked me, and I met a lot of very fine people in the taxi industry and limousine industry. Mr. Sahabi, for example, in the limousines, and they were from the airport were enjoined. And at one point, when I took over as chair for this reason, there was a lot of scammers coming in and taking taxi business at the airport. And there was, I wondered why it was happening.
Regularized,
So it wasn't, the dispatching wasn't as early. So I was up there at 4 a.m, 5, and checking it out, and I could see that the dispatch weren't sending them in quick enough. So we actually had people standing there, a staff member, calling in them, and they weren't calling them fast enough. So we then had to call them in. So that's how we got rid of the scammers coming in, was the fact that the taxi industry is more efficient in getting taxis there for people to bundle into, rather than, they're tired, they're 15-minute wait, and they'll go up with someone with a car.
For sure. That's
So
right.
we're involved all the way through. Great bunch of people. I enjoyed their company.
And what did you do for the improvement of air quality in Mississauga?
Well,
now you have to running short of time. So
I think that I was on the air quality, and one of the things we did at Ahern, we met with the Ahern people, and we got them to cover the coal supplies. We initiated their activity because it's their brain power and their engineers experts that were able to do it. And we would have them at the Public Works Committee. They would come. They realized it was important. And a lot of items came through. There were a couple of people in Toronto that were very committed as well. And the former leader of the NDP was on that committee.
Jack Layton.
Jack Layton was there too. But it was another lady that her daughter had suffered from asthma, and she was most concerned about air quality. So it was something that was done, and of course it's way in distant history, but it led to a lot of public thinking that has led to different perceptions later.
David, will you throw some light on the 24 committees, very briefly? You
Oh, boy.
hold such a lot, huge committees in your control. How did you manage one man in
Well, they
the
weren't all
24
the same.
committees?
They weren't all at the same time, and some of them were the region. So it was basically. I remember going off the planning committee one time, and a group of business people came to me and said, "You got to get back on there. It's starting to get ridiculous." I had a certain common sense and put my intelligence, which is there, arrogance, but it's there. But it's the common sense of finding solutions,
Right.
yeah.
and making decisions
the
that
main thing, yeah.
other people can live with.
So
And so you sometimes go on because you're asked to go on.
Very good. So, David, we also see that you've worked with many agencies that you've already told us about as well. But serving our people, United Way and City Centre, Opera Board, and then in 1998, the Rotary Foundation also gave you the highest
give a
award.
brief account now. The
Yeah.
red light is showing.
Oh, the red, yeah.
Showing signals that the time is up, because then we don't have to cut major portion of the interview. So be very
Yeah.
brief, and we end this interview with you.
I fell in love with opera singers, I guess.
Amazing.
So I tried to assist in fundraising. I remember asking the opera director that she might have to dance on tables to raise funds, but we did raise funds. And I was actively involved for quite some time. I was a bachelor at the time, and so that was kind of an interesting period. Life comes at you, and you have to respond.
Definitely.
And that's basically why I did everything. It was responding to situations.
Go ahead, Cindy.
Very good.
The last question.
So, David, you've done so much for the public service in your active life, and it's hard to cover all of them, of course, it would take about 4 to 5 interviews to do that. Due to the paucity of time, if you could, and we'll soon be signing off, if you could please kindly give some concluding comments and remarks and advice to our Canadians through our talk show interview.
Well, I think that I was youthful and arrogant, and I was intelligent. I had studied a lot of things that related in topics, but you're humbled by average people stepping out
Definitely.
and doing things.
Definitely.
And I was always inspired by people. I just quickly into my mind, there was a lady that came forward at a critical time and made a stand in the community for something we wanted to get done. But it's the people that you run into, the vast majority are very fine people.
Very fine.
Yeah.
And in the community, you need volunteers.
Definitely.
You need people to do things.
To volunteer
That's
things.
part of the
That's a
Canadian
Be part of it.
secret, really.
Secret, yeah.
Is that from small town to cities, we live in villages, even in the city, and we all have to participate. So all I
And
was
do
doing was,
volunteer.
and I did that after
And
I was
learn.
retired as well.
Volunteer and learn.
Yeah.
You don't have to jump from step 1 to step 12
Exactly.
by one go.
Be
So
part of
with
the
that
community.
note, we'll soon be signing off for this week's program, Voice of Canada, with our honored guest, David Culham, my co-host, Cindy Young. We would be back next week again with our show, which is being produced by Awaz TV Entertainment. And your host is Asphandiar Wadiwalla and Cindy Young. We'll say goodbye, good night, adios, and God bless Canada.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.